Hare Krishna. So this is today is the 28th part of the Bhagavad Gita section of our Bhakti Shastri course. And today we'll be completing chapter 13, which we started last week. It'll be from verses 20 to 35. That's up to the end of the chapter. And so next week we'll be starting a new chapter, chapter 14. And as we mentioned last time, this chapter is the beginning of the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, and it's considered, we had some differences of opinion. Prabhupada and Balabdeva Vibhushan says there's bhakti, karma, and jnana in it, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says it's primarily a jnana section. But for us devotees, if we're already convinced of devotional service, the knowledge given in this section of the Bhagavad Gita is very relevant for us, making our bhakti strong and steady. As we mentioned before in Nectar of Instruction, we'll cover again in Nectar of Devotion, that we take up the practice of bhakti, but it says that it's unsteady, anishtita. And so it's difficult for us to remain focused sufficiently in our bhakti. It says we have greater and lesser enthusiasm, so many different things. And so that the knowledge that's going to be given to us in these 6 chapters are really going to be relevant for those of us who've taken up the practice of bhakti, but are trying to have greater and greater steadiness in the practice. We'll see that, I think, especially as we finish this chapter, and it'll be clear as we go along. So let's start. We have 15 verses to cover, so we're going to be a little bit short on time, I fear. So let's start. This is text 20, Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, text 20. And it says, material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. The word is anadi, without beginning. Their transformations, it's vikaran, and the modes of matter are products of material nature. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, the material manifestation is from the energy of the Supreme Lord, and so also are the living entities. But the living entities are of the superior energy. Both the living entities and the material nature existed before this cosmos was manifested. Material nature was absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of the Mahatattva. Remember, last time we covered this, the nature, Krishna called it the field, which immediately means our bodies, but also an extension the rest of the world. And then there was the knowers of the field. And the knowers were the jiva, us, the soul, and the super soul. So here Krishna is saying that both of those two things, the field and the knower of the field, the individual entities, the jivas, they're existing even before each round of creation. The material universes are created, they exist for some time and are destroyed. And that process of creation and destruction goes on for some time, and then there's a point where there's no material creation at all. Everything is dormant. And here it says that the material nature was absorbed in Mahavishnu during that time when there's no material creation at all. So it's still existing, and therefore eternal. But the individual universes are temporary. And then he says, similarly, the living entities are also in him. And because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. Thus they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. So it says that during the period of time when there's no material universes, both the material nature, the ingredients that form the field, and the jivas, one of the two knowers of the field, are within the body of Mahavishnu. So we don't know how many times we've done that, outlived a universe, and had to go back in. So this is very, very long. And And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, from this it is understood that because matter and jiva are both without origin, being my Shaktis, as he's speaking, putting words in Krishna's mouth here, their connection is also without origin, anadi. But there is a real difference between them, even though they are mutually connected. And so both, I think it's both Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan, that they say that not only are the jivas and the material nature, so old that they predate the universe, but also they've been connected together for this long period of time. And here Prabhupada mentions this. Actually, the living entity is originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to his rebellious nature, he is conditioned within material nature. It really does not matter how these living entities or superior entities of the Supreme Lord have come in contact with material nature. He says the Supreme Personality of Godhead knows, however, how and why this actually took place. So Prabhupada is suggesting that they weren't always connected. And so sometimes with anadi, with beginningless, Prabhupada will say it's happened since time immemorial. You can't trace it can't trace back. It's been so long, been very, very long. He says at some point, and so he says it really doesn't matter how the jivas came into contact with material nature, because really the fact is here we are, and it's not the place for us, and we want to return back to the spiritual world. So the reasons aren't so important. And so, but he says, so he indicates here that there was a time when we were not connected, even though it says it's anadi. But the connection goes back a long time. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, know also that the body, senses, and other elements, the gunan, he says, and the transformation of the gunas, such as happiness, distress, lamentation, and illusion, he says vikaran, all arise from Prakriti. And we already heard that before, actually, earlier on, that was part of the field. So there's transformations or interactions, Prabhupada called them. And so happiness, distress, lamentation, illusion are part of the field, part of Prakriti, part of material nature. And then Prabhupada says, but we should know it with certainty from the descriptions of these few verses, that all transformations and influences of material nature by the three modes are also productions of material nature. All transformations and variety in respect to living entities are due to the body. As far as spirit is concerned, living entities are all the same. So please take note, as far as spirit is concerned, all living entities are the same. It doesn't mean that every individual soul is identical with another, but that when a particular soul, because we're actually all are individuals, basically the same, but we're individuals, we have individual personalities, but we may be in various different types of bodies. So there's not such thing as a human soul, a turtle soul, a dog soul, or a cat soul. So there's many different living entities, embodied entities, and the souls in them are the same type of thing. There's souls. Every soul can be embodied by all these different types of bodies. There's not specifically different types of souls. We all have our own unique personality, but there's not different kinds of souls in that way. So he says, as far as spirit is concerned, they're all the same. I can be a frog, I can be a human, I can be a devata. I have all those types of bodies, and I'm the same. There's only souls. There are generically they're all the same. They're all have individual personalities. Okay. And then it looks like something opposite is being said. And this is going to help us to understand the matter clearly. It's nature. This is 21. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments of the world. Remember, we just heard very clearly, both from Srila Prabhupada and from Vishwanath, and also earlier on in the first part, that happiness and distress, lamentation and illusion arise from Prakriti. And here Krishna is saying the living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments in the material world. So there seems to be a little contradiction here. So it'll take some clarification. And here's the previous section in verse 6 and 7. It says the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses in the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress. It says the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions, all these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. Vikaram is used here, interactions. And vikaran, transformations, in the last verse. So there it clearly said it's part of Prakriti. Here it's saying it's due to the soul. And Prabhupada says in the purport, his material happiness and distress are due to his body and not to himself as it is. So again, it seems to be on the side of the field, material nature, rather than the knower of the field, the jiva. But then Prabhupada gives us an explanation, because actually the sufferings are on both sides, as it turns out. He says, in his purport, he says, according to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters, different types of bodies, is what he means. The being himself is the cause of this attaining such residential quarters, and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. So we are put in specific circumstances with specific happinesses and distresses and these sorts of things because of our own desires, the jiva's desires. And that's what he's indicating here. And then Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, even though the body, the senses, and the sense devatas, and the jiva's capacity for enjoyment, he quotes the word bhoktritva, are all qualities of Prakriti. Because of the predominance of unconsciousness in the body, senses, and sense devatas, and the predominance of consciousness in experiencing happiness and distress, bhoktri, he quotes, the two get separately designated as causes according to predominance. According to this reasoning, it is said that Prakriti is the cause by producing the body, sense, and sense devatas, and Jiva is the cause by his capacity to experience happiness and distress. Okay, so is that clear? In order for there to be happiness and distress and such thing, lamentation and these things, it takes both sides. The particular, first of all, the particular type you're going to experience depends on your type of body and your circumstances, and that comes from the desires of the soul and our previous actions. So the soul has to take some responsibility for that, and then these things have to come through. You have to have certain stimuli that come through the senses, or certain thoughts that come into the mind that cause us distress. If we touch a flame, or come close to something too hot or something too cold, we have some kind of sense perceptions. The senses have to act in order for there to be distress, or a certain thought has to come to the mind that causes us distress or happiness, or we touch something pleasant or see something pleasant. But that doesn't translate into happiness or pleasure unless we can be conscious of it. And so the soul is the consciousness part. The soul is one who experiences that. So there has to be the situation, and there has to be the sensory stimulation or the mental stimulation that causes these things, happiness or distress, lamentation, such things. And then we have to have consciousness to be able to actually experience it. So it's actually on both sides of the equation. It's when those two come together You need the equipment and you need the consciousness. It's not a perfect analogy, but if we are undergoing surgery and we're under anesthesia, okay, the nerves are still picking up the cutting of the body, but we're not conscious of it. Actually, so it has to be both things. We can be conscious, but we don't have the material sensory input, so we can't have material happiness or distress. And even if the senses are there and working, we have to be conscious of them. So it's something that happens on both sides. Is what happens there. Then 22, Prabhupada translates it. He says, the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. So it says that the living entities, Purusha, are Prakritista. Prabhupada says in the word for it, situated in the material energy. And they're Bhunte, the enjoying, the Prakriti Jan, things that are the produced things, the qualities, the gunan, the qualities that are produced by the material nature. So we're sitting in material energy, and we're enjoying or suffering things that are produced by produced by material nature, produced by Prakriti, that are parts of the field. Okay, and it says the cause of that. That's why he says, Prabhupada says, this is due to he's enjoying the three modes of material nature. This is due to his association. So it's karanam. The cause of that is guna sangha, that we're associating with the qualities of material nature, or the three gunas. And because of that, right, we are in good and bad species of life. Prabhupada says in the word for word. He says he meets with good and evil among various species. So sometimes we're in a lower form of life, sometimes in a higher form of life. So this, as we mentioned before, the enjoyment or the suffering comes by the coming together, this guna sangan, associating with the material energy, the jiva associating with the material energy. So the material experiences come through that. We need the senses and the other apparatus, but we need consciousness as well. And as that happens, we keep taking birth after birth after birth according to our karma. Different types of births. So this association between the two things, the field and the knower of the field, are causing happiness and suffering, and the cycle of birth and death. Apparent birth and death. So Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, this verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. So this guna sangan is being associated, it implies a certain attraction and attachment. The two are by nature separate, but we are clinging on to them. And then he says, unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. Okay, this is the glue that causes us to be in association, guna sangha, with material nature, with the material qualities. We have material desires. We think this is going to fulfill. There's a place in the Bhagavatam where it says actually that when the soul acquires this equipment, it gets associated with material nature, that there's a certain optimism a certain happiness that comes about. They think it will be very fruitful. The word is palavan. It will produce nice fruit. And so that's what we're thinking. We have this optimism that we can see because it has momentum for so many lives that we always feel that we can get something out of this world. There's underlying optimism about material nature. And we have these material desires. It's also called karmashan, these material desires that are burning in us. And then Prabhupada goes on, he says, under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. So, the cycle of bodies goes on, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not so good. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains along similar lines, he says, but the jiva, just by misidentification caused by beginningless ignorance, thinks that his capacity for action and enjoyment are his very nature, though they are just the nature of things related to him, like the body and the senses. So one thing that's going to come up as we go along in this chapter is not only is there this kind of attachment and desire, but there's this misidentification that we think that the body and the senses are us. And one of the things that Krishna is going to talk about, how we try to separate the two, because he's already said there's a separation. There's the field and the knower of the field. They're separate. The soul and the material nature are quite separate. But we're connected because we have these material desires, and even more so because we think that's us. We think this body, we don't think of it that I'm the knower of the field and this body is the field. We don't think we're separate. We think this is me. And so Krishna's going to give us some antidotes to that. Because he's going to, now that he's explaining that it's the connection between the two that are causing us to go through the cycle of birth and death and have all these different types of, dualities, attachment and aversion, lamentation, happiness and distress, these kind of things. He's going to, but they're actually separate. He's going to try to teach us how we can separate them and see them as separate. So misidentification, he says. So there's attachment, and that really, even below that is this identification. I think it's us. We think it's us. We don't say, oh, this is different from me, but I think we can use it to produce happiness. We come to the point where we think it's just me. In the Bhagavatam, there's kind of an indication that there's a progression. First of all, the connection is there, and we think, oh, it will be very fruitful, and we become so absorbed in that we begin to forget that there's a difference. So that the optimism comes first, and then there's this misidentification which carries on. And that really makes it difficult then to see things in the proper perspective. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, though the soul does not actually contact the body, the contact is fabricated through ignorance. So we're separate, but we feel that we are connected. And Baladev Bijabhushan says, this verse makes clear the agency of the jiva alone in enjoying and suffering and living within Prakriti. That it's the attachment and the ignorance that's causing us, the misidentification, that's causing us to remain associated with the material nature. Our misidentification and our desires for material enjoyment are the binding force. It's all really on our side. Which is good, because then we have a chance to do something about it. Right? If the material nature was holding us and we only were partially responsible, then we'd have to do something to force the material nature to release us. But here it says it's really up to us. It's our attachment, our misidentification that's causing it to be the case and to perpetuate it. And then Prabhupada says in the purport, the living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long-cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. So Prabhupada tells us how we can do that, how we can fix the problem. Since it's on our side, as Baladev Buddha says, what can we do? So this is we hear about it. We're hearing now this chapter, so we hear about the real situation, and of course, if we take up the path of bhakti, we want to begin to serve, and so we will. He says, and gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, replacing it with a desire to serve, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. So that's the solution. Now, continuing here in text 23, he says, "Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer," as para is the word, who is the Lord, the Maha Ishvara, supreme controller, literally, the supreme proprietor, I guess that can be the Maha Ishvara there, who exists as the overseer. Yeah, there's the Bharta is the master, that's the Lord, and the Maha Ishvara is the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer, upadrashta, and permitter, anumanta, and he is known as the supersoul, the Paramatma, Paramatma. And we already heard that there's the two types of knowers of the field, the one who's trying to enjoy, and then the superior one, the Lord himself, the jiva and the supersoul. And Vishwanacharya Thakur, he says here, he says, having spoken of the jiva, the Lord speaks about the Paramatma. Though the Lord already described Paramatma in general and in detail from verses 13 to 18, it should be understood that the present statement is made in order to clearly show that the Paramatma is situated in all bodies, along with the jiva, but different from the jiva. This is something that Prabhupada also goes on quite a bit about in his commentary, that the impersonalists will try to say that there's only one spirit, and somehow the super soul and the soul are the same. And so the Krishna is being very careful here to show there's two different knowers. One is superior and one is inferior. And Baladev Vijayabhushan, he says in that word upadrashta, the overseer, he says that the upa part indicates that the super soul is near. That's one of the meanings of upa. It can be over, but also can be near. So he says that he's right with us. So I thought that was very sweet. And that super soul is close to us. And Prabhupada says, the individual soul enjoys the activities of a particular field, but the super soul is present not as finite enjoyer, nor as one taking part in bodily activities, but as the witness, overseer, permitter, and supreme enjoyer. His name is Paramatma, not Atma, and he is transcendental. So again, two different knowers of the field. One is captivated by the material nature, one is not. One is small and limited, and the other one is the Supreme Lord and all-powerful. And Prabhupada mentioned why he's there. Here he does. He says, and because the Paramatma is the Supreme Lord, he is present within to sanction the individual's desiring material enjoyment, the permitter. Without the sanction of the Supreme Soul, the individual soul cannot do anything. The individual is bhukta, or the sustained, and the Lord is bhukta, or the maintainer. There are innumerable living entities, and he is staying in them as a friend. We've heard how Krishna is the friend of our well-wishing friend several times already. And Prabhupada goes on, as long as he is conditioned by the material energy, the Supreme Lord, as his friend, the Supersoul, stays with him just to get him to return to the spiritual energy. From without, he gives us instructions as stated in Bhagavad Gita, and from within, he tries to convince the living entity that his activities in the material field are not conducive to real happiness. Just give it up and turn your faith toward me. Then you will be happy, he says. That's what Prabhupada speaks for the super soul there. Then text 24, One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. Okay. So we want the devotional service is done on the platform of the soul, genuine devotional service. And there's a reason why Srila Prabhupada emphasized in his preaching so much how we're not a physical body, we're a soul. So it says here maybe Gyanis, they can understand this intellectually and can help them to go to liberation. For us, the understanding of who we are, because real devotion, the nature of ourself is we are devotion. We are devotion. That's really what we are. The soul is devoted to Krishna. So as long as we are misidentified with the body, then that devotion can't flow so easily, and we're fighting against this desire for material enjoyment, and that causes us to be unsteady in our devotion. The soul wants to serve. We've made that decision from a soul level to serve Krishna, but we're fighting our material desires, and we're still thinking of ourselves to be the body and the minds in so many ways. And that means we're kind of divided against ourselves. We have these two goals that are antithetical to each other. And as our devotion grows, our material enjoyment wanes. As our material desires increase, our devotion wanes. So it's very difficult for us to remain steady on the path. So for us, trying to understand ourselves, how we are connected, how we're not really connected, and it's only our material desires and our misidentification that's keeping us connected with material nature. And understanding that we are separate from that helps us to be able to remove this block to our progression of our service. And so this is very important stuff for us as bhaktas. How to understand ourselves as a soul. And then we can be who we are. Now we keep getting sucked into wanting something from the material nature. So Prabhupada says, clear understanding of material nature, the super soul, the individual soul, and their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. This is the result of knowledge. And then he says, by his personal endeavor in association with authorities, saintly persons, and the spiritual master, he has to understand his position and then revert to spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness by understanding Bhagavad Gita as is explained by the personality of Godhead. So he mentioned that there's this personal endeavor. Well, if we understand this knowledge, it's going to help us in our spiritual practice. And that's what's going to lead us to the goal. It isn't just that we will understand it and that will be enough. He says by his personal endeavor, he has to understand his position and then revert to spiritual consciousness. Okay. Then 25. Some perceive the supersoul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. So we have the Sankhya, Karma Yogena, and Jnanena by meditation. We saw these things. This should sound familiar to you from the first 6 chapters. It sounds like the yoga ladder, and we'll come back to that. So there's 3 ways that people try to experience this super soul. And Prabhupada says, in other words, only the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are best situated in spiritual understanding because they understand that beyond this material nature are the spiritual world and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is expanded as the Paramatma, the super soul in everyone, the all-pervading Godhead. So he's here saying that the devotees are best situated in spiritual understanding. And he goes on and he says that the Gyanis here and the karma yogis, he suggests that the value of approach is that they can become devotees. So he says the Sankhya philosophers analyze this material world into 24 elements, and they place the individual soul as the 25th item. When they are able to understand the nature of the individual soul to be transcendental to the material elements, they are able to understand also that above the individual soul there is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the 26th element. Thus, gradually they also come to the standard of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Because we saw that there were a couple of different paths that the Jnanis could take. They could transition to the dhyana, the meditation, right? It says that the yoga ladder went that way. You did karma yoga, nishkama karma yoga, doing your duty without thought of the results, without material desires. That led to a better understanding of the soul to some degree, which then allowed them to transition into jnana, where they had deeper knowledge and they had deeper realization of the soul. And when that went further, they could start this process of jhana or meditation. Also, it said that some of the jnanis could themselves, it says after many births, attain to devotional service by understanding that Krishna, that Vasudevam Sarvamati, that Vasudeva was everything. Also, we know that anybody through contact with devotees can turn to devotional service. So he's saying that the Sankhya philosophers then they can could either progress up to dhyana or they could attain to bhakti, and that would be they gradually also come to the standard of devotional service. So that would be the real benefit for them. That's how they would actually perceive the super soul, is by eventually either coming to dhyana or bhakti. And then he says, those who work without fruitive results are also perfect in their attitude. This is the karma yogis, or the nishkama karma yogis. We just usually call them karma yogis, for that's what Krishna usually mentions. They are given a chance to advance to the platform of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. So again, he says that the value of that is that it may lead you to devotion. So again, he's really saying that devotion is the way to know the super soul here. These other ways are more indirect. But then he mentions the third part, the dhyana, the meditational yogis. He says, here it is stated that there are some people who are pure in consciousness and who try to find out the super soul by meditation, and when they discover the super soul within themselves, they become transcendentally situated. Okay. So he indicates here that some of the people in meditation may, without climbing up the ladder all the way to bhakti, may have vision of the super soul. But the Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he seems to say something a little different, and we're going to reconcile that. He says, in this regard, nishkama karma yoga, jnana yoga, and ashtanga yoga, this is the acting without desires, the jnanis and the meditational people, and are successive causes of each other, and not direct causes of seeing Paramatma. So he's talking about the yoga ladder. We saw that the Nishkama Karma Yoga, when successful, transforms into Jnana Yoga in the yoga ladder, and successful Jnana Yoga transforms into Ashtanga or Dhyana Yoga. And he says that they are not direct causes of seeing Paramatma. And he explains, he says, that is because their nature is sattvic, they're in the mode of goodness, and thus the result can only be sattvic. But the nature of Paramatma is beyond the gunas. So he's saying that none of these things should be able to produce direct realization of Paramatma. Or Prabhupada seemed to indicate that the dhyana, the meditation of Ashtanga Yoga, people could do it. So let's look at it a little bit more carefully. So we should see, we saw the yoga ladder. We recognized what the Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said. There was the yoga ladder, which can lead to bhakti. And Prabhupada indicates, though, that even those on the lower rungs may also take up bhakti without going all the steps. That can happen through the association of devotees, or sometimes the jnanis after many births can understand something. So while Srila Prabhupada agrees with Vishwanath regarding karma yoga and jnana having no independent power to give realization of the super soul, he indicates that meditators may see the super soul without having to come to bhakti. And that's what we saw in chapter 6. What Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said before will reconcile the two things. That jnana alone won't do it, but he said, he has mentioned many times that it's possible to that every other dharma, whether it's the nishkama karma yoga or jnana yoga, has to have some element of bhakti in it. And when we were going through the yoga ladder chapters, Krishna was inserting bhakti into the practice from almost right away from the second chapter onward. There was practices of sacrifice to please Lord Vishnu was a central part. One was supposed to be offering the results of things to Krishna. One was supposed to be fixing his mind on Krishna and performing his karma yoga. So Krishna had added elements of bhakti from the very beginning, and that causes them to be successful. And so meditation with that influx of bhakti, a mixture of bhakti integrated into it, then they were able to have visions of the super soul. But not without that. So I think that reconciles the two opinions there. In any case, we come back to the notion that all those three paths, all the steps in the yoga ladder are not practical for us in this day and age. So it's kind of a moot point. The way we're going to understand the super soul is through bhakti. And then 26. And again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, now we're going to talk to us, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So instead of coming to it from karma yoga, jnana yoga, or ashtanga yoga, we hear about him from authorities, upasate, anyabhya, from others. And it says that works very well. And Prabhupada comments, he says, this verse is particularly applicable to modern society because in modern society there is practically no education in spiritual matters. So we can't follow the path of karma yoga, we can't follow jnana yoga, and we can't follow ashtanga yoga as it's meant to be done. So this is the path for us. We're left with bhakti. And he says, although the common man is often not as capable as so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Okay. So we're hearing about the super soul, and we're hearing about also the source of the super soul, Krishna, and we're worshiping in that way. And then 27, O chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Okay? And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, from this verse till the end, the Lord expands on the meaning of what he already spoke. So we're not going to get something entirely new, but he's going to explain a little bit more depth. And Prabhupada says in his purport, there are many manifestations like trees, mountains, and hills which are not moving, and there are many existences which are moving, and all of them are but combinations of material nature and the superior nature, the living entity. Mountains are considered to be alive, as you can see here. The living entity is also there. So when they are expanding and growing, there's an indication that there's a jiva inside. And then Baladev Vijayabhushan says, the Lord speaks of the extent of the creation of the living entities that takes place through a combination of the jiva and prakriti in order to determine how to separate the two, which have been associating since beginningless time. So that's the purpose. We see what happens when they remain connected by our desires for material enjoyment, thinking that we can get happiness through this connection, and when we think that we are that the immediate part of the field, our bodies, is us, and mind is us. That we don't realize it as equipment. We see what happens, continuous birth and death, and never full happiness. We read in chapter 3 about the kama, how the desire, how it's never satisfied. So now Krishna says we want to try to break that connection, or at least change it. In bhakti, we want to transform it first. That's the easiest way to do it. And Prabhupada already talked about that. It says as our desire for domination goes down, then our spiritual happiness goes up. Our desire to serve goes up. Instead of thinking that we are the owners and the proprietors and enjoyers, we think that everything belongs to Krishna. And we try to use the equipment we've been given and the resources around us to please Krishna. That's the bhakti way. Because we talked about that, how difficult it is to separate the two without this feeling of connection with Krishna. And we talked how the Ashtanga yogis had to be able to withdraw their attention from the mind and senses in order to see themselves as a soul and see the super soul, and how difficult that process is. So it's very difficult, even intellectually, to separate these two things. And so in bhakti, we see everything as belonging to Krishna, including our own selves. And that we begin to use the equipment and the things around us, facilities around us, in the service of Krishna. And that changes our attitude. It breaks that material enjoyment attitude. And it also helps us to remove the identification. That the body is me. And that's how we begin to separate it. But this understanding of how how it's working, helps us to do that. Okay, so that's the purpose of what we're going to hear from. Especially, we're going to summarize a process how the two can be separated. We can understand them to be separate, and it can help us on our path here. Then 28, one who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, so they're the two knowers of the field, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. Some of the other commentators, both Baladev Vijayabhushan and Vishnacharya Thakur, just says that the super soul is being talked about here, but Prabhupada says there's other commentators that see it a little differently, so he mentions them both. Prabhupada explains in the purport, the Sanskrit word parameshvara is sometimes translated as the individual soul, because the soul is the master of the body, and after the destruction of the body, he transfers to another form. In that way, he is master. But there are others who interpret this parameshvara to be the super soul. In either case, both the super soul and individual soul continue. They are not destroyed. So Prabhupada incorporates them both into his translation. So you see the super soul accompanying the individual soul, and all. You see them both of the knowers of the field, and you understand that they are separate. And when the bodies are destroyed, the material nature itself is never destroyed. It goes back into the body of Mahavishnu, but the forms of the material nature, all those things are destructible. The forms that it takes are temporary. We learned that from chapter 2, all the way back from chapter 2. So Prabhupada incorporates both the soul and the super soul, that we see them in all bodies, and we understand that they are not destroyed when the body is destroyed. And so then in 29, one who sees the super soul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. So this is calling attention to the importance of there being a super soul there, besides the fact that the super soul is there trying to instruct us as our friend, but just understanding that that there's not only souls in other bodies, but the super soul is present everywhere. We're surrounded by the super soul, actually, if we had the eyes to see it, is a very important way, part of our untangling ourselves from the misidentification and the material desires, which are binding us to the material nature and causing us to go through the cycle of birth and death. Okay? He says, because such a person who understands the presence of the supersoul does not degrade himself by his mind. We'll get some explanation of that here. Prabhupada says in the purport, the living entity, by accepting his material existence, has become situated differently than in his spiritual existence. So we want to reverse that. But if one understands that the Supreme is situated in his Paramatma manifestation everywhere, that is, if one can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every living being, he does not degrade himself by a destructive mentality. And he therefore gradually advances to the spiritual world. He says the mind is generally addicted to sense gratifying processes, but when the mind turns to the supersoul, one becomes advanced in spiritual understanding. My own comment here is that if you understand the presence of the Lord, it does a couple of things for us. Usually we're thinking, right, that we are the body and the things around us can be rightfully be ours. There's a sense of proprietorship, Prabhupada calls it. And then we feel entitled to use things and people, other beings, for our enjoyment. They're ours. And we can do with them what we like. I and mine. Right? But the awareness of the presence of the Supersoul contradicts that. Here's the Supreme Lord. Okay, so who owns it? Is it me or the Supreme Lord? Supreme Lord. Who should be, who gets to use it? Who should be, who should be the enjoyer? Me or the Supreme Lord? So it disabuses us of this notion of proprietorship and entitlement to enjoyment. If we understand the presence of the real owner and the real Lord in front of us. Even if we understand that there's a soul in another body, right, we may think, well, there's competition. I can use you for my enjoyment, or you can try to use me. But when there's a super soul there, it's a whole different idea. Very clear. Who's the master? Who's the servant? And 30, actually looks like we're going to finish quite well on time here. I thought we had so many slides, but it moves fairly quickly. We've got 30 through 35 remaining. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, and this is an interesting section here, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. So first we understood how we're connected with the material nature. Now we're trying to see how to remove ourselves from that connection, to distance ourselves from that connection and understand ourselves correctly. So so the first step was being able to understand the presence of the Lord. First of all that the jivas ourselves, don't die when the body dies. We understood that. We understood that we're naturally separate, but because of our own misidentification and desires are connected. So we understood that. That's helpful also, that there's something we can do to change that. It was voluntary on our part, and we can do something to change it. That's important, that we are naturally separate. And then if we understand that there's the presence of the Lord everywhere, so that it really stops our false ideas of proprietorship and entitlement. And the next thing is here. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is creative material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually see. So now we're gonna try to see the line of demarcation between the souls and the knowers of the field and the field. And Prabhupada says this body is made by material nature under the direction of the super soul, and whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not his doing. This is surprising to us, isn't it? Whatever one is supposed to do, either for happiness or distress, one is forced to do because of the bodily constitution. The self, however, is outside all these bodily activities. The body is given according to one's past desires. To fulfill desires, one is given the body, with which one acts accordingly. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says similarly, one who sees that all actions are done by Prakriti in the form of body and senses, and who sees that the jiva is the doer only by thinking himself the body, but is not actually the doer, actually sees. So this we've heard about this notion a few times before. I found three examples in 219, where Krishna says that the soul neither kills nor is killed. Right, the bodies are killing bodies. 327. Yikes! What did I can't? This is where he says that it's where it says that only under the notion of the false ego, the spirit soul is bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. And 514, where he says, no, well, I'm getting a problem with my... Anyway, let's go here. It says that the embodied spirit, the master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. And so, but I don't want us to misunderstand this, because this is important. Prabhupada was mentioning how we're forced to do things. And so we might think that we're just automatons, right? That we have no freedom whatsoever. The soul has no, it's just a passive observer. And that isn't completely true. Otherwise, why would Krishna be teaching us from Bhagavad Gita? We're supposed to be making choices. We're supposed to be understanding and making choices. Why are there scriptures? Okay? What's really happening, and this is explained later on in the Bhagavad Gita, is that the soul has to sign off on every action. It's one of the factors of action. Okay? Now, if we're deeply conditioned, we cannot resist the impulses of the mind and the senses. And so basically the soul just signs off on them. It's like rubber stamps everything that is suggested by the mind, the intelligence, and the senses. That's what happens. And we generally act quite predictably. Mm-hmm. But as we have some spiritual understanding, we can exercise more and more freedom. The other thing is, if we remember in Isha Upanishad, Prabhupada said that human life is one of responsibility. So we have responsibility for our good and our bad actions. We can be punished, get bad karma, and are punished for our sinful activities and rewarded for our good activities. If we're just automatons, just observing and everything is acting without any participation from ourselves, that wouldn't be the case. We can't be responsible for being on automatic. What happens is that the Prakriti, the material nature, reacts to our desires. The actual actions are done by the material nature. I know they're creating right these days prosthetic limbs that can be controlled by the mind. So the limbs are moving. They have some kind of power source in them and mechanism in them. And so by thinking of what you want them to do, they can do that. Okay? So it's something like that. We have a desire to act in a certain way, and the material nature can respond to that. So we're not able, under our own power, to make the actions take place. That's done by material nature. That's a question of our desire. That's the soul part of it. That's why we're responsible. That's why we can ultimately make choices about our future. We can decide to take up the practice of bhakti because we've heard from Bhagavad Gita or not. So that's our part of it. Otherwise, we say, well, we can't commit a sin. I was forced to do it by material nature. Yeah. So according to the type of body we get, there's a likelihood that we'll act in different ways. There's different levels of freedom that the soul has under those circumstances. So in the human life, we begin to really be able to exercise some of that freedom. And Prabhupada says that that for the animals, they don't get sinful reactions because basically they're there. They can't exercise their freedom whatsoever. The soul just rubber stamps all the activities. That's why they slowly move up the evolutionary chain toward the human life. But in human life, we have some chance. We take responsibility for actions. We actually put something into it. But the actual actions are done by the actions of our body and stuff. We can't do them. We can only wish them to be done, will them to be done, and material nature does them. That's the dividing line. Okay? So that helps, if we see it that way, that helps us to break the identification with the body, the misidentification with the body. If we see that the body is a mechanism that we can just, we desire to act in a certain way, and it does. Then in 31, it says, when a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. So let's take a look at, this is pretty much the whole purport, I think. There's a short one. It says, when one can see that the various bodies of living entities arise due to the different desires of the individual soul, see, Prabhupada is mentioning that aspect now, and do not actually belong to the soul itself, one actually sees. In the material conception of life, we find someone a demigod, someone a human being, a cat, a dog, a cat, etc. This is material vision, not actual vision. This material differentiation is due to a material conception of life. After the destruction of the material body, the spirit soul is one. The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. It means the same spiritual soul can be in all these different forms of bodies and remains the same one. It's the same soul that comes out and goes into a body and comes out and goes into another and comes out, same spirit soul. When one can see this, he attains spiritual vision, thus being freed from differentiations like man, animal, big, low, etc. When one becomes purified in his consciousness and able to develop Krishna consciousness in his spiritual identity, how he then sees things will be explained in the next verse. So he says this. So if we get that understanding, that there's not, cat souls, dog souls, human souls, demigod souls, and that they're all just the equipment of individual souls, that also changes our perspective. We see the real essence there is the soul and not the body. So this is going to help us in the disentanglement. And then Prabhupada says, how he then sees things will be explained in the next verse. So that leads to this next verse here. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. So Prabhupada says, he has a short purport. He says, the living entity appears to be born because of the birth of the material body, but actually the living entity is eternal. He is not born, and in spite of his being situated in a material body, he is transcendental and eternal. Thus he cannot be destroyed. By nature he is full of bliss. He does not engage himself in any material activities. Therefore the activities performed due to his contact with the material bodies do not entangle him. So it helps us on our side of things, when we see all these different other bodies and know that they're simply souls inside, to know that we're also like that. Who we think we are, our physical form and even our mind, is not the real thing. And we've passed through many things like this before. That helps us to break that misidentification with the body. And of course, when we're identified with the body and we're thinking in terms of material desires and enjoyment, then we look for that in other bodies. And so we have friends and enemies. We have objects of desire and things persons that repulse us. And we the more we see ourselves as body, and the more we see others as bodies, it reinforces that concept. The more you see yourself as soul and others as souls, the less identification there is, the less there's the notion of using their bodies for your material enjoyment in some way, manipulating them in some way. The more we're thinking of ourselves as the body, the more we see others as bodies, and the more that type of interaction proceeds. And so he says, with the vision of eternity, if we see that this is only my temporary equipment, and that the souls are imperishable, transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. That there just only is it's not a real connection. The souls they're coming out just as they went in to the different bodies. Nothing is transformed, nothing is changed. If we understand that allows us to see others in the proper perspective and ourselves in the proper perspective. Let's take a look at 33. And then he gives an example of how this is happening. He says the sky, it's akasham, the sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the body, though situated in the body, situated in that body. So this is explaining how the soul is very subtle, so it's in the body, but it's not actually connected in any substantive way. And Prabhupada here, he uses the word air. He says the air enters into water, mud, stool, and whatever else is there. Still, it does not mix with anything. Similarly, the living entity, even though situated in various varieties of bodies, is aloof from them due to his subtle nature. Therefore, it is impossible to see with the material eyes how the living entity is in contact with this body and how he is out of it after the destruction of the body. He says no one in science can ascertain this. That's the purport he has. And so he instead of sky, he uses the word air, which also, it kind of works also. There's a place in the Bhagavatam where it mentions how the air, passes through all kinds of places and things, but isn't changed by that. It may pick up the aroma for a little while, but that's not intrinsic to the air, and eventually the aroma passes away and the air continues on. So there's only temporary connections with things. The chemical composition of the air remains the same. It just somehow carries some of the fragrance along for some time. But Baladev Vidyabhushan, he uses the word ether. And you can see how Prabhupada you can see how Prabhupada's commentary kind of follows along from Baladev Vidyabhushan. He says, just as ether, though entering everywhere into mud or other impure items, Prabhupada he said mud, stool, and whatever else, is not touched by their qualities because of its very subtle nature. So the jiva, though situated in all high and low bodies of devas and men, sarvatra is the word in the verse, is not contaminated by those qualities because he is very subtle. So you can see the Prabhupada followed this commentary quite a bit. But the word, and so the air works okay, but the sky or ether really usually refers to space rather than air. And so it's even more subtle. Everything is in space, but it doesn't affect it. The space is still space. So it's more subtle in all those things, and so it seems to be in conjunction with it, but it doesn't affect the space whatsoever. It's the same thing. The soul seems to be there, but there's no real connection. The connection is facilitated, actually, it's called the ahankara, or the false ego, that allows us to identify with it. But there's no real connection. We heard in the second chapter so many times how the soul is changeless. All of and we mentioned before how even in this life we feel how we've been affected by our experiences. We've learned things. Sometimes we say we've learned things the hard way. Sometimes we've learned things the easy way and the happy way. And we feel that we've been changed by our circumstances. We may say things like I'm this particular way because of this that happened to me, or that kind of, we're affected by our memories, and we're affected by the good and bad experiences we've had. They help to make our personality. And actually, it's understood that we bring so many past impressions with us from our past lives as well that affect our personality. That's why we have different tastes. We react to things differently than other people do. We bring us things that we're attracted to, things that we're fearful and averse to. We bring with us these deep remembrances of positive things and negative things that affect us. But those are all in our subtle body. They're all part of the material nature. The soul itself hasn't been touched. It's too subtle. It can't be affected. We're as whole and complete and undamaged as ever. We haven't become something new either. We're just what we were when we first entered into material nature, and we will be the same when we leave. So now we're getting to the very end here. This is 34. O son of Bharata, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does a living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So now we heard about things that the soul wasn't, and now we're going to hear what it is, how we can recognize the soul. We say it's something that it's not. It can't move the body. Right? It's not affected by anything. It has a body and is tied with this world because of this false identification and material desires. But it's so subtle it can't even be affected by so many millions of births and deaths. What is it? Right? How can we recognize ourselves? We've heard the things we're not, to get rid of our false identification. Now, what is something we can identify with? Right? So this is a good example here that's given in text 34. Prabhupada says, as the sun is situated in one place, but is illuminating the whole universe, so a small particle of spirit soul, although situated in the heart of this body, is illuminating the whole body by consciousness. Thus, consciousness is the proof of the presence of the soul, as sunshine or light is the proof of the presence of the sun. When the soul is present in the body, there is consciousness all over the body, and as soon as the soul has passed from the body, there is no more consciousness. This can be easily understood by any intelligent man. Therefore, consciousness is not a product of the combination of matter, it is the symptom of the living entity. We heard this originally in chapter 2, text 17. So the soul is spread all over the body, and Prabhupada in the commentary says by consciousness. So we were first introduced to that notion back then. And so my comment is, after showing what the jiva is not, Krishna now gives a hint at what the jiva is. So we've had all these false understandings, and now we find out, something we can identify with. This is what we are. We're the consciousness. That's who we are. We're not the body. We're not the rest of the material nature. Have no real connection with that at all, but we are consciousness. And then text 35 is a summary of the chapter, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and also the Prabhupada. Those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain to the supreme goal. So we just heard about that process. Also, there was Prabhupada says it was there in, here's what Prabhupada says. The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body and the owner of the body, and the supersoul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12. These were what was classified as knowledge, all the different qualities that we should have and positive endeavors that were there. Then one can go on to the supreme destination. So there's two places actually where there was really instructions about liberation. Here we kind of saw a process here in these last verses, how we can disentangle. This is the Valdev Vijabhusha, and say now Krishna is showing us how to disentangle. We show that before in those verses that were connected to each other, 8 through 12, that Krishna said this was knowledge. And Prabhupada called it then a process, that we try to develop these various qualities. For us as bhaktas, he said that the focus was this, undeviating devotional service, which produced all the other good qualities. And that was the process. Bhakti was the process, really. For the jnanis, they could maybe try to have to really try to develop these other qualities along with some bhakti. But for us, it was bhakti. And then here, at the end, we had this kind of, these are the ways we can untangle the two, disentangle the jiva and the material nature that have been caught up with each other for so long because of the jiva's misidentification and material desires. And then Prabhupada, he gives kind of a summary of the whole chapter really here. So it's kind of nice. So I took quite a bit of the purport here. A faithful person should at first have some good association to hear of God. So he's talking about the bringing up again the hearing process, rather than the karma yoga, jnana yoga, or meditational yoga, and thus gradually become enlightened. If one accepts a spiritual master, one can learn to distinguish between matter and spirit, and that becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization. The two things are I think, the identification with matter and the desire to enjoy matter, always go together. They reinforce each other. And so even if we begin to take up the practice of bhakti or some other spiritual process, we're fighting that. There's so much momentum there. And so we have to come to the point, and the under the control of material nature, there's that kama. That it says that burning desire. It's a burning. It says it's burning in two ways, right? Usually we say a burning desire means it's really urgent, and we have to try to. It's really pulling us for fulfillment. But then also it really says it's burning because no matter how much you try to fulfill it, it's just like a fire consumes an unlimited amount of wood or fuel. When we try to satisfy our desires, it just produces more desires. It doesn't lead to satisfaction. So when we're attached with material nature, when we're trying to enjoy it, when we're misidentifying with the body, there's always dissatisfaction. There's never enough. There's never happiness. and we're simply trying in vain, to find peace and happiness. And so unless we can whereas the soul itself, we've heard in chapters 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, how when people begin to realize themselves as spirit, how things change so dramatically. How suddenly they no longer have desires. Now suddenly happiness and distress, we've heard this so many times, people becoming equal in that. Happiness and distress really matter when you're trying to enjoy material nature. When you're thinking that you're the body and you're trying to find happiness that way. Distress is you really don't want that. And happiness, whatever happiness you can get is very important to you. But when there's an inner happiness that comes from the soul, the pleasant and unpleasant sensations simply don't make that much difference. Krishna was telling Arjuna that in 2:14. Be tolerant. Do the right thing. Be tolerant. So as long as there's strong identification and that strong desire for material enjoyment, the inner happiness can't come out. The spiritual happiness can't come out. And we're just drawn to acting in material ways. We can't get out of it. So Prabhupada says it becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization. When we can have some understanding of ourselves as spirit, we can break some of that misidentification. Then we feel, he says, that param drishta navarti, that the higher taste comes out. And that makes us more able then to see ourselves in the right way, to serve instead of try to enjoy. And it smooths our path along the path of devotion. So that's why these chapters we're going to understand how we're connected, how we're in illusion, how we're connected with matter, and how we can get out of it. Some understandings we can have that can help us get out of it. Meditations we can have. That's going to help us in our bhakti so very, very much. Then at the end, last of all, the Prabhupada says, the body is the gross manifestation, and the subtle manifestation is the mind and psychological effects. So there's gross body and subtle body. And the symptoms of life are the interaction of these features. But over and above this, there is the soul, and there is also the supersoul. One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of the soul and material elements can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul, and can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. So this is something that says for contemplation and realization. So he's indicating that this is useful for us in our practice of devotional service. So that concludes our discussion on chapter 13. Next week we'll pick up with chapter 14 and carry on from there. This is going to be a very interesting chapter, the modes of material nature, coming up, which really helps us to understand how things are working with ourselves and around ourselves. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.